life in 3 dimensions got me bent and got me twisting. I know I done said a lot, but I should probably stop pretending. I don't really hold the key and I can't really push a button. I just step up to the mic and try my very best to bust it, but I ran out of breath. It's tight in my chest, my feet just might fail. I can't stand the pressure.
What's going on, Racially Speaking family? We are back, and I'm extra hyped. John Mark, it has been a minute since the two of us have done this together. Am I right?
Sure has. It sure has, yeah.
Welcome
it's good
back,
to be back
man.
on the mic with you.
Yeah, dude. How you been?
I've been good. In general, I've been good. Today I was listening to an album called what is it? The Harder They Fall.
Okay.
You know about that movie?
I've heard about it, but not much. It sounds familiar.
Yeah, I was just listening to the album. It was just encouraging. I love cowboys, westerns, and this is a black cowboy movie. I'm sure I told you about it. I probably told you about it on this show, but I like to go back and listen to albums, and it was just fun to get back into that music. And I think Jay-Z had a touch on it, and it was good. It was good. So now I'm feeling great.
You love cowboys. Yeah. Never knew.
I do. Yeah. I mean, my first name is Wyatt, right? Wyatt Walker. So like. Western
wait,
Wyatt,
what? That is your first name?
Yeah, that's my first name. So Wyatt Walker, so like Walker, Texas Ranger, and Wyatt Earp, so
oh my goodness.
I no connections. I'm not named for any cowboys. It's all family names, but I don't know.
So you just dropped a very big personal thing. You slid that in there.
Yeah, just slide it in there. Yeah, so good. This morning, I'm doing great. Yeah, this morning.
Wow.
Life is good. Yeah. What about you? How are you doing?
Oh, I'm good. Well, that was crazy. That reminds me, if you've watched the show New Girl, at the end of the series, when you find out that Schmidt's name is, well, I don't want to ruin it for people. Well, whatever.
It's been like 6 years.
His name is also Winston.
What? I didn't know that.
Oh, okay. Well, I ruined it for you.
I never got that far, New Girl.
Okay, well,
that's hilarious.
Anyway, you'll be surprised, hopefully, if you ever get to it. But that's how that just felt to me. Wow.
That's awesome.
Our listeners are going to think we just met each other. I mean, they know that we're newer friends, but okay. Why?
Yeah.
So that's your first name is?
Yeah. Wyatt. Yeah. So it's named after my grandfather.
Okay.
Yeah, but my parents decided to call me John Mark. So that's why I go by John Mark.
Wow.
Wyatt John Mark Walker. That's my name.
I've never heard of a hyphenated middle name.
Yeah, me either. I'm the only person with it.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. You have to look up some statistics on how many of those exist.
On hyphenated middle names? Yeah.
Yeah, specifically middle names. Wow. Yeah, man, I'm doing good too. I think probably my highlight since we last talked was, or one of my highlights, I've had more than one, but Caitlin and I saw In the Heights live in person.
Wow. Nice.
They randomly swung through Roanoke, Virginia. We were out there with the kids and saw a sign at one of the local theaters. And if you guys don't know what In the Heights is, it's written by Lin-Manuel Miranda from Hamilton, and it was his first show, and it won Best Broadway Show, just like Hamilton did, but way back in the day. And In the Heights, it's about his neighbor that he grew up in New York City, Washington Heights, and of course was the big movie this past summer. Or was that 2 summers ago? Anyway.
I think it was just last year, yeah.
Right. I mean, and dude, this was incredible. I posted a little bit about it on social media and I shared when we went. But you might think, local, small town theater, not going to be, up to par. And I was a little bit nervous going into it. So was Caitlin because she's the Broadway person out of the two of us. I'm catching up a little bit, but it was, in no way did it feel like, oh man, this is disappointing, or I can really tell these are second or B actors. Absolutely not. Like, it was
really
moving. It was incredible. The acting, the singing, all of that was just, it felt, I would have paid double to go see it. And it was only here for a short time. And so, if it would have been here for longer, we for sure would have made it back because it was incredible.
That's great. From my understanding, the show has more characters and plot than the movie does.
Yeah, very. It is different. There's some characters that weren't in the movie, I think it was different in a good way. I think the movie was great and the show was great for the reasons that they did what they did. Like, I don't think the changes in the movie were to the show's detriment. I think it just made sense for the movie.
Yep.
And
you got to cut time for movies, but shows.
Both
you
were
got
incredible.
the intermission, so you have like 2.5 hours with a captivated audience. So yeah.
And I mean, just if you don't like live theater, I just encourage you to go. Well, you can't check that out right now, but if you get a chance, check out live performances. So I'm a huge sports person, but I think I'm comfortable saying that I don't know if there's anything more clutch than or unbelievable than performances like that.
Yeah.
Especially
live,
theater people like doing that every single night, having to be on point, memorizing everything, and just the coordination and just the direction of it all is just wow. It's incredible. I'm blown away every time.
Yeah. That's so I want to share now my recent theater experience.
Yeah.
So my wife's cousin, shout out to Catherine and Avery Torres, they bought us tickets to the Lion King here in Richmond.
Wow.
And so we got to see that recently, and that was really neat too. So I'm becoming more of a fan of theater. I think as I get older and I guess more cultured, right? It's
a slippery slope.
Yeah,
man.
I mean, In the Heights, dude, I would love to see that.
Oh my gosh, yeah! Shout out to our friend Tabitha, because she came on around when the movie came out and talked a little bit about that as a New Yorker.
Yeah, because she's familiar with that culture from that area, right?
Right.
Just from real close to that neighborhood that he was talking about. So
she was right there and had all the insights from a New Yorican perspective.
Yeah, so I say to anyone who hasn't heard that episode, go listen to it.
Yeah, man. Anyway, like I said at the beginning of the intro, we got a lot we need to catch up on, but don't have time for everything because, man, just stuff happens. So I got kind of like a quasi game for us to play here to start off the pod.
Okay.
Do you want to do games. Do you want to do like a current event summary? And I'll bring up a topic, and if you got thoughts, let's give it a few minutes, and if you don't, let's keep it moving.
Sounds great.
Sounds good. I should have come up with a name for it since it's a game, but anyway, since we last did this, the Oscars happened.
Oh man.
Nothing big happened that night, right?
Yeah. Except, Will Smith won Best Actor, right?
That
That's
happened.
all
I forgot
the
that
news
happened.
about Will Smith, right?
All right, so it sounds like we got some thoughts. What you're alluding to, if you've been living under a rock, what's been referred to as the slap heard around the world happened. Will Smith slapping Chris Rock on live television on stage. We've got the luxury of having a lot of time having passed, so our thoughts aren't necessarily super raw, but what are some of your quick takes on that incident?
Yeah, quick takes. There's a lot of shame in a slap, and Chris Rock slapped, or Will Smith slapped Chris Rock, and Chris Rock took the shame of that slap. His joke, it was off color at Jada's expense. I don't know. So on one hand, it is not a comedy show. And you can expect jokes like that if Jada and Will were to show up at a Chris Rock comedy show. Like, they're going to be made fun of. It's the Oscars. So that type of banter with the audience maybe shouldn't be in that type of space. All right. But Will Smith also didn't need to get up and assault the man. Yeah. But also, it wasn't a punch. A slap in a lot of past Western cultures was just like, hey, let's have a duel or fight with swords. You know what I mean? So it's like, it was less than a punch, but not nothing. So it's complicated. When I saw that news happen that morning, the first thing that popped into my mind was Kanye West's song "Family Business," where he just talks about a cookout, a family cookout, and the things that go on there. And that's what I thought. Like, Black Hollywood elite. It's a small club. They're both in it, Will and Chris, and that type of thing should have been handled just in their community. Without eyes on it, because when you're Black in America, in any profession, you're under a microscope, right? And so whatever you do, because of racism, whatever you do, you represent the culture to the broader world, right? And so seeing him get up on stage and slapped Chris Rock, I mean, immediately, I'm sure everybody black was like, oh no, like our reputation, because we realize that reality, we share that reputation. And it's not fair. It's not a good reality, but it is. And so that was kind of a bummer to see Will Smith go out that way.
Yeah, I mean, other than the obvious that it was supposed to be Will Smith's night, like I think everyone knew he was going to win, and it was his time. And it's just, I think it's sad for him and for entertainment, for the Williams sisters, and everyone that made that movie, King Richard, because no one's going to remember that in the grand scheme of things, because that night is now marked by that slap. And he put out an apology. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this, which I thought was as good as it could be. And was he banned from the Academy for 10 years? He's had a lot of ramifications.
10 years. That's
he's
a
banned,
heavy
and he also resigned, I think. So I can't remember. So either way, he's removed from the Academy for a long time. So there's been ramifications and consequences to that. Yeah. I think I won't add really anything to what you said, other than it's maybe a little bit of a question, something you touched on. The only thing, and I won't speak for the black community, obviously, I did not, and I could kind of see this coming when I saw the slap, but I don't like the slew of tweets and posts by both some people in the black community, prominent people, and obviously I don't like it when it's from white people, but people putting out the sentiment of we need to do better because of the reputation you just mentioned. Because now, now this reputation that black people have, whether it's, I don't know, being irresponsible, being violent, not being able to be controlled, something like that, or not giving platforms, like, of course, look, this is what happens. And I saw so many tweets or whatever, posts about that, even people from inside the black community saying, like, we got to do better to prove that our people that think these things about us wrong. Yeah. I see. So I think I would agree with you. Like, I wish I could have heard what Denzel and Tyler Perry were talking to him about.
I know.
In the commercial break. Because I think it's just like, that's a thing that, man, needed to happen behind closed doors between like Will Smith. They should have gone backstage and talked it out, him and Chris Rock. I know that might sound idealistic, but ideally I think something more like that should have happened. With a Denzel and Tyler Perry facilitating the conversation or something, or mediating. But I don't like that sentiment of we need to do better so that people don't think we're all these things. Because to me, I don't think it's black people's problem or people of color's problem for having to deal with stereotypes. Like, it's not, and tell me if you disagree or not, but I don't think it's your problem, John Mark, as a black man, to worry about, or to have to worry about people's reaction to that, if that makes sense. Like, if something like that's going to happen, it's not your responsibility to deal with racist thinking.
Yeah.
I know you have to at the same time for different reasons, but I don't think it's your problem that somebody can see that and be like, oh, look, that's what black people do.
Yes.
To me, that's their problem.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is not just, it's not right that that black people or other ethnic minority groups have to deal with putting on this front where we represent our whole communities, our whole ethnicity, our whole race, in how we act. That's a burden that we have to carry, that majority culture, white people don't have to necessarily carry. So, I don't think it's necessarily fair, right? But I think it's a reality, right? So I think some of those calls from black people for Will Smith to behave better on a national stage,
behave better,
comes from that. So I think it's a reality. I don't think it's right. I hear what you're saying, but I think it is what it is. I think it's part of the talk that people of children who are black and brown have to have. Is like when you go out there, you represent a whole culture, a whole people, it's wrong that people will think of you in that way, or I mean, maybe not wrong, but it is what it is, you know? So, and I think that reality is going to stay for a long time. So, yeah, it's, I don't know the right word for it. It's awkward. It's a burden. It's heavy.
I also
but
think
it is a reality. Yeah.
Right. I also think it implies that because of that irresponsible type of behavior, that I think it implies that is why something like discrimination or racism exists. Like that, because they can't conduct themselves better, that's why they're not given all these things. I just want to say this, like that is absolutely not true. Like racism, discrimination have nothing to do with how Black and brown people have behaved.
Yes.
Like
Amen.
it came completely based on things like skin color.
Yeah.
And
say it again. Yeah.
It has nothing to do. It has nothing to do with
absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Why these things exist in the first place. So that's a little bit of my hot takes about some of the pushback on that. With that said, I mean, do I think what Will Smith did was absolutely wrong and not good? Yes, absolutely. And I think he agrees with that take that was not good.
Do I think 10 years is a little too long? Yeah, I think 10 years is a little too long. But
yeah, I don't know.
What are you going to do? You know?
Yeah.
Did you know this? Interesting fact. The nanny named Fran is the president of the Academy. So she's the one who, signed off on that 10-year ban.
Oh, wow.
So the nanny named Fran banned the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air for 10 years from the Academy. Like, who would have thought back in the 90s that would happen today? So,
wow.
Little pop culture fact.
Yeah, wow. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. Next thing. Completely, not completely in a different realm, but Ketanji Brown Jackson. Got any thoughts on her? She was first, since we last talked, first Black Supreme Court justice confirmed to the Supreme Court. Yeah.
First Black woman.
First Black woman, yes.
Right?
Yeah, first Black woman.
So I don't have many thoughts on that. It's a great first. She's highly qualified. I know there are people out there who disagree with her politically from the community that I come from. But I can celebrate that she's a Black woman who has a great career. There are pictures of her daughter being proud of her. I thought that was a beautiful moment. Yeah. Some of the line of questioning was it was weird. It was there was some,
to put it delicately.
Yeah, to put it delicately, it was weird. How do I say this? It was they lacked respect for her.
Yes.
And some of it is probably tied to the fact that she is a woman and that she is Black.
Yeah.
Right.
So I saw a lot of that. Did you watch any of the hearings?
I did. Yeah, I did.
I wanted to do some, due diligence and watch some of them for myself. I saw a lot of people posting about the, racist, insensitive questioning. So I was like, all right, I gotta at least see it and make some conclusions by myself. And yeah, I think what stood out for me was the tone. You said lacking respect. Yeah, absolutely lacking respect. And what I did is I watched those hearings, many of them, and then went back and watched ones that those same people, senators, would refer to in comparison. And some of them were the Brett Kavanaugh hearings and then the Amy Coney Barrett hearings, and kind of just comparing this. I was like, okay, I'm going to go back and listen to some of the same senators questioning those Supreme Court justices and kind of compare what I think about them. And, I encourage everyone listening, if you want to form an opinion, go back and do that yourself. Don't take our word for it. But my take is just picking up on just picking up on what you said. The lacking respect was like night and day different. Yeah. And and I went into it knowing that, like, okay, this is, these are bipartisan things. Like, people are going to support their party, and so that explains some of the questioning, or even a lot of it. So that's why I really camped out with thinking about tone and watching them. That's just what could not stand out to me watching like Senator who's Black and Democratic Cory Booker. His encouragement to Ketanji Brown Jackson was the one that got passed around because him just encouraging her as a Black man. But then what stood out to me is watching his questioning of Amy Coney Barrett, who he disagrees with a lot, but how polite he was in his questioning of her, even when she would give much pushback, not wanting to answer questions, just incredibly polite, and just had a much respect even through disagreement as he spoke with her. And I'd say the same for a number of others, but the egregious lack of respect that I saw was from South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, and then
he was rude.
Yeah, and then Ted Cruz. To me,
rude. Yes.
Those two specifically were just egregiously inexcusable. And
yes,
I agree that there's got to be. You can't put your finger on all of it other than the tone sometimes, and that just really stood out to me.
Yeah, I've never lived in this world as a Black woman, so I don't know that experience. But I do have sisters, and I know that just from conversations with them. I don't want to speak for them, but I have a sense and I've heard that the relationship between Black women and white men in significant power positions, authority positions, if you're a strong Black woman who's educated, who's smart, who's accomplished, white men often don't know how to handle that. And I'm making generalizations, right?
Sure.
But white men in power don't face that. It's mind-blowing. It's category bending. They don't know how to interact with somebody like that. And so I think it really it surfaces some stereotypes, some negative stereotypes they have in their minds of Black women, and just a lack of experience of relating to Black women. And I'm sure some of it comes from that. So so I think that is some of what we saw, is like they don't know how to respect Black and they don't know how to respect women, right? And so the combination of those two kind of brought them outside of themselves, kind of broke their minds. So, so I think that's some of what we saw.
Right. Yeah. All right, let's go a couple more. Elon Musk buying Twitter. I don't have much to say about that right now.
Yeah, me either. I just laughed. I mean, I laughed. Right. I saw people on Black Twitter trying to leave Twitter. They're like, we're leaving Twitter now, right? I was like, I don't know anything about Elon. It goes from one group of wealthy white people owning it to one man. I'm like,
I guess it's maybe a bigger deal because is he actually the richest man in the world? At least close to it?
He might be. I'm not sure. Somebody from UAE might actually be, but.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I've seen stuff that he's tied to apartheid and has a lot of racist ties.
I mean,
but I don't
you have all that money.
Opinion.
How can you not? Especially if you're doing business in America, right? So, not to say that that's not an excuse for him. I'm just saying, I'm sure that's true about his business dealings. But
so that, and maybe we'll talk about it when more comes out later. But I know he's saying that he's doing it for the sake of freedom of speech, which we'll have to unpack that if more comes out. But I don't have much more to add about that.
Yeah. I mean, I'll still be on Twitter, follow at Walker, John Mark. Yeah. So, you'll probably still be on Twitter, right? You're not planning on leaving.
Yeah. I mean, not that would matter whatsoever because I am almost never on there. But follow John Mark. So, don't follow me on there because it won't be any kind of big deal or anything. All right. Before we move on, John Mark, you had one other current event that we haven't touched on that is huge, and we haven't been able to touch on that here on the pod yet, and that's the war in Ukraine. Yeah, and particularly the experience of international students, Black international students, so African international students, and they had some trouble leaving the country early on. And there's an article that I want to plug on Christianity Today by Rayshawn Graves, and it's titled "Who Is My Neighbor?" An honest look at the racism inside the Ukraine crisis. And I think it's an underreported story, or at least it was at the time of this article being written about a month ago. It's just there was some discrimination
for international students in Ukraine.
Specifically, I think it's worth looking at.
Yeah, particularly Black students. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a lot shared along those lines, but
did you?
Yeah, to me, I don't have a ton of opinion about it. I mean, it's not good, but to me, that's just a great example of how two things can be true at the same time. Like Ukraine's going through a war and is absolutely the victim and is being attacked. But then also we're seeing literal, racism coming out of that very country as Black students are trying to flee for safety and are being discriminated against in Ukraine, where they're absolutely collectively the victim. So that stood out to me as how just two things can and are true often in these conversations.
Yeah, it's sad. I think it's a part of humanity too, right? It's like it's easy to care when things are going well. Yeah. But once stuff goes sideways and you got to look out for your family, who you see as your own starts to really narrow. So while Ukrainians were helping other Ukrainians, when it comes to an international African student, sometimes the help was gone, or being able to cross borders. Like I think they were trying to cross the border. I'm going to get it wrong. Wherever they were trying to cross, they weren't allowed to. There wasn't help for them. Yeah. Sometimes because they didn't have the papers that they needed. But so it's a really sad situation, a really plain look at, I think, human nature that when it comes down to it, sometimes our self-sacrificing nature goes out the window and we are just broken people who are a little more selfish than we would like to admit. But then I also think some of that prejudice is one of, I would say it's an American export, right? So traveling while Black across the world, you face a lot of awkward either fetishization or racism, discrimination. It's just something you always have to be aware of because so much of it comes from, if you're a Black American, it comes from back home and you kind of face that where you travel. So being African also goes along with that. Like how much did Ukraine see how the U.S. treats Black people and import some of those thoughts, through media, through culture, through things like that. So it's heartbreaking. But I plug this article, Who's My Neighbor?
We'll put that in the show notes.
Today. Yeah. And then I think there was also a podcast episode on it on the Daily, so you can look into that too. Okay. I don't have exact information on that, but
absolutely.
Yeah.
I got nothing else to add to that. Appreciate that. Let's take a quick break and we'll move this along.
Sounds good.
This podcast was created to elevate BIPOC voices and our allies and to invite everyone else to listen in, learn, and grow with us. If you've benefited from listening to any of our conversations and haven't already, please make sure to hit subscribe in whatever app you're listening on right now. Now, back to the conversation. All right, John Mark, for these next two bigger topics on this episode we're going to take everyone to church for a little bit. Sound good?
It sounds great. Let's do it.
Yeah, so just recently, and I posted about this a little bit on social media, I sat down and watched the Hillsong documentary, Hillsong, a Megachurch Exposed, I think is the full name. It's on Discovery Plus. You can get it through Amazon, do a free 7-day trial. That's not a plug or anything for Amazon. That's just how you gotta get it. I know most people don't have Discovery.
You probably haven't used your trial yet, right? So get that free trial.
Right, so that's where it is. And man, I got a lot of thoughts on it. And racially speaking, there's not a ton to say about it, but I do think there is some overlaps. And I know that many people on here, or many people listening, share our Christian faith. And I think there's a lot of overlap culturally that is worth talking about it. Some of it, I think, is tied to race, but much of it I think is just important to discuss. So I don't know, have you watched it at all, John Mark?
I did. Yeah, I watched all 3 episodes, and the way that the story is told, it's very heavy. It's very heavy content.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah, and you have more of a personal connection with Hillsong, right?
I do. Not necessarily with Hillsong, and I in no way want to preface this by saying I don't want to make this in any way about me, but I did have some weird personal ties to it, which I already knew going into it I might, but as I was watching, there's a segment on a church in Virginia Beach. I think it's okay to name names right now, but
yeah, I'm sure it is.
The Wave Church in Virginia Beach with my 757 people know about that church. And I grew up with some prominent people that have a lot to do with that church beyond just membership. And trying to think of how to go about this first part. But attending that church a couple of times, being in some small group Bible studies several times, with people at that church, and even for a short stint through that church. Hindsight is 20/20, and I was much younger. As I was watching the documentary, and all of this wasn't completely new to myself, but it was putting some stuff together. I felt like some of my experiences made sense, and it was along the lines of what's in the documentary, of this kind of elitism, materialistic culture that was very corporately. The church will be advertised as come as you are type mentality. Everyone's welcome, just like every church essentially says.
Right. Essentially, yeah.
And then, but I felt like once I was around those people, and I'm not saying there wasn't exceptions, but the culture overall with those people, I very much was aware of like, man, unless I do this, this, and this, or have these things, I am only going to be able to be accepted so much. And more importantly, which is what a lot of the documentary was about, there was just so much praise towards the higher up people, like way more beyond my comfort level. I'm not look up to your pastor and be mentored and want to be like them in some way, in a healthy way, but there was too much, and I couldn't put my finger on it, too much stock put into higher up pastors. In this case, half of the documentary is about Carl Lentz, the New York City Hillsong pastor that stepped down or was fired, and is kind of known as the big celebrity pastor. He's from Virginia Beach and got started at the Wave. He spent
time at Wave, yeah.
Right, at the Wave Church. That's where he got started. And he's about our age, I think a little bit older, but was the guy that the people who I was around at that time were just obsessed with and were talking about all the time.
Right.
And I never personally met him, and I didn't realize that he was the same Carl that was always mentioned, because they didn't say, Carl Lentz. They would just say, Carl does this, Carl this, Carl that, Carl this. Carl told me this, Carl preached about this Sunday, Carl did this. And I was like, man, who's this guy? This guy seems great, I guess. They talk about him a lot, but I couldn't exactly put my finger on it. And I had no idea it was the same one until watching the documentary that ended up going to Hillsong, New York City, and whatnot. But those kinds of things, that stuck out to me. And this isn't not even just about Hillsong, but thinking about the things they broke down in the documentary culturally.
Yeah.
Were just very sobering to think about. And
yeah,
vocationally, John Mark, you and I are in, not Hillsong, but in this space, the Christian evangelical world. And so it was very like, I paused a lot. Me and Caitlin watched it together of like, oh my gosh, like I so do not want to be, I almost came a little, not paranoid, but I'm like, man, I don't want people to be turned off from church or Christianity because of myself either. Not that I've anywhere that kind of platform, but I lead stuff like Bible studies and stuff like that. So the thoughts that I had about the overall culture were heavy personally.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just I think the celebritization of pastors is a cultural thing. And I think along what you were saying, like you were talking about, we're racially speaking, but culture is very connected, and culture is something that we want to talk about on this podcast. Yeah. And I think that there are just some cultural trends within the broader majority culture evangelical world that were exposed in this documentary. And one of those is when you put too much weight on one guy and the celebrity of one preacher, it can have some real damaging effects to the community that's supposed to be following Christ, but ends up following this personality, right?
Right.
And I think we saw some of that with Carl Lentz. Like, he himself was puffed up with pride in who he thought he was and hanging out with all these celebrities. But then the people also were all about praising the celebrities that he brought in and kind of making a separate spot to take only celebrities to, which if you read the book of James there's a Bible verse that talks exactly about not privileging people in certain positions when they come into the church, but that is what they did. So, so I think it's good of you to touch on the broader aspects.
Right.
Yeah.
And watching it, the people that they interviewed, I don't know where they're at necessarily, if they would now say they are practicing Christians. Mm-hmm. So some of the stuff I would take with a grain of salt. Overall, I thought it was a really good, honest documentary for the most part. There were a couple things that, because I wanted to be objective, it's a documentary, so I wanted to be as objective as I could.
It's a documentary.
So a few of the things they did say, which I was like, well, that is probably not good, but it might not be the worst thing necessarily, because I wasn't there. But so like, even there's a part in the documentary which you just mentioned, but for our listeners, where people shared that when celebrities started coming, and it's New York City, they would give them special places to sit. Yes, if they're like, given, a throne or something like on stage to be worshipped or something, yeah, bad, not good. But I don't know if I think it's innately bad that they were given like a reserved seat when they're in New York City, because, for even security reasons.
Security, yep.
I don't necessarily think that was the worst thing. Again, I wasn't there, so stuff like that I was like, okay, that probably wasn't good based on what this has been about so far, but I'm not going to jump on that and run with it necessarily. And then,
it all depends on where and how it's done.
Right. And then somebody shared one of the interviews, said, I knew it was a bad idea when Hillsong planted a church in New York City, because most of the people aren't Christian, so why would you plant a church there? And, from a Christian perspective, I'm like, well, because they want to make more, spread the gospel and make more Christians. But from that perspective, I was like, well, that's not necessarily, that's what missionaries do, no matter how big they are.
We don't just trade Christians around.
Right. Which some do for sure, but I can't hate on them for doing that necessarily. If if what they're saying overall was accurate, which it seems like it maybe was, like they were some of the interviewees were very turned off by how Hillsong has been gone from Australia to global. And again, if they just want to take over the world, which is what they kept saying throughout the documentary, bad, like not good, but just because they have multi campuses and sites, can't hate on them specifically for that, because I don't think that's necessarily an innately bad thing. One thing I was, racially speaking, disappointed by is like with Carl Lentz. So he's, speaking of the celebrity stuff, I think it's interesting because, now we see how this could kind of have been his downfall, but he said, and I wonder what you think, John Mark, he said, yeah, I do want to reach celebrities because that means we're reaching everybody. Essentially, should we not care about that? So again, I think if it's his priority to only reach celebrities, not good. But I thought that I didn't think that was necessarily a terrible thing either. And only because I've read, I'm a nerd when it comes to sports too. And I've read a lot of memoirs and biographies of like NBA players and athletes. And several of them have talked about how they've experienced Christianity through like Hillsong, or they knew Carl Lentz and they met him playing basketball, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I thought it seemed like a genuinely good thing in a way of like, oh, this is cool. He seems like he is somehow able to relate and live life with these seemingly untouchable people. Right. And what they write about in their books seemed real. It didn't seem like they were like duped or manipulated. It just it seemed good. Now with the documentary, looking back, it's like, whoa, shoot, I don't know. And then again with Carl Lentz is, I don't know if you ever saw this, but he was one of the people, Emmanuel Acho, who does the videos on YouTube, or at least used to do them, uncomfortable conversations with the black man. Yeah. And during 2020 in lieu of George Floyd, he brought him on, and I thought Carl Lentz did a great job speaking about, or humbly owning his position and owning the fact that white evangelicalism is a problem and has a lot of work to do with racial justice. And so I only thought that was good because I found myself at that time, at least, feeling like, okay, people can say what they want about a Carl Lentz. I'm not going to start jumping on and, idolizing him by any means, but I found myself wishing, why are more pastors that we look up to and follow not doing this, like not speaking up in this same way? And so I found that, I was struck by that of like, we can, like, people can hate on these big celebrity pastors all they want, but I'm wondering where the disconnect is. Why are more people not speaking up and advocating like this? So, now that he's had his quote unquote downfall, it does feel a little bit like a letdown if we're going to talk about some of the racial element. Yeah. What are some of your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I like what you said. God can use an imperfect messenger, right? And certainly he was able to be in the community of celebrities in a way that other people cannot. And so, I mean, we see Justin Bieber's story and the impact he had. Their friendship was a little bit awkward, with the generations between them, the decades, but, but it helped Justin Bieber at a time when he needed some help, and so I think God can use imperfect people, and certainly Carl Lentz is one. I also appreciate that he was willing to speak out about racism at a time when other people weren't. And then this isn't to minimize his unfaithfulness to his wife, or even the hypocrisy of a pastor cheating on his wife. But it was in this time, I think we kind of can like lump all sin together, all infidelity, all sexual sin together. And this was adultery. This wasn't abuse, to my knowledge. It wasn't like manipulative. And so I think there's something there that he's not the same as some of these other cases, like Ravi Zacharias, or I don't know, you name it. There are people out there, but I don't know. It's not a good thing. I'm not excusing. I don't want to excuse what he did, but I also want him to be set aside as he did this. It was different than some of the other things that we see pastors doing.
Yeah. And I think that, again, go watch the documentary for yourself, but a lot of it was about personal stuff like Carl Lentz and stuff. But the big thing was culture, which I thought would be worth talking about a little bit, of how he was the product of the Hillsong culture, the megachurch culture, and a lot of really Christian culture in a lot of ways, but specifically with, a megachurch, which it was called Megachurch Exposed. And then I'm thinking about Mark Driscoll and the rise and fall of Mars Hill in Seattle, which is a podcast. I'm halfway through that one. I know a lot of people have listened to that already. Very similar, but also very different. And just what it looks like to hold that culture accountable. And then I've had these thoughts recently, even before watching that documentary and listening to the podcast, the Mars Hill one. But the megachurch culture is I think can be concerning, but it's also like I have great friends that are in megachurches, and I don't think that's the thing. Like I don't think it is in and of itself a bad thing. Like this kind of stuff can happen in small churches.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is important to know.
Just happens on a smaller scale in a small church.
Right, and doesn't have a documentary, written about it. But I'm thinking about like the, which we've talked about a little bit on this pod or alluded to, but like Maverick City does worship, who's very, I think, multicultural.
Yeah,
multicultural worship band and worship organization, and then you got your Mike Todd's, who's a prominent Black megachurch pastor right now, very active on like social media and stuff. Like, I don't know, and I in no way wish anything negative on any of them, but some of the similarities of how the culture comes off, I don't know. Like I want there to not be any more of those kind of downfalls, especially when it seems like maybe progress, racially speaking, in these lanes is being made. I get worried because of how detrimental that could be overall to the causes. Religious, whether it's religiously or just equality wise. I don't know. What do you think on the big picture, like megachurch culture, with the things I just railed off?
Yeah. I mean, I see what you're talking about. There certainly is a culture there. I don't know. I also hope that there would be no more, but I'm confident there will be. I'm confident there will be more scandals, unless we the people in those cultures take a lesson from Mars Hill and the downfall, or the trouble that surfaced from Hillsong, or even some things that are going on over at Grace Community Church out in California, around from Julie Roy's report. Just some lack of care for those who are with less power, those who could more easily be abused, lack of leadership and caring. I think a lot of it comes down to a lot of what I see is that, and even along the lines of caring about racial justice or racial oppression from a church elder pastoral perspective. It's missing in a lot of spaces. And so in connection with what you're saying, those who do care about it, Maverick City, working with who they work with, I pray for the best for them, that they, walk with the Lord, that Jesus preserves them.
I mean, and this is my opinion, but how I think two things can be true, but there's also just, I feel like there can be reason for self-reflection. And so, for instance, like Maverick City just won at least one Grammy, maybe multiple, right? And
nice.
My reaction is, do they need to be performing on top of a building, decked out like a rock band, and having it look like kind of like a rock concert at the Grammy Awards when they're singing a worship song? I don't know. I don't know if that's bad. As far as like what we're talking about, it does cause me to pause and think, is that a good idea? I don't know what's behind that. Like, is that a good idea? But then in the same week, there's a video that surfaces of them, doing prison ministry, and just, it looks like, man, it's like a really, really powerful thing that they're doing of sharing the music in the prison system. I don't know. I wanted us to be able to talk about it a little bit, because I think culturally, like, I can't, as much as I'd want to, and just have the reaction of like, oh, well, that's not me, as a Christian who wants to keep speaking up about justice in these circles. I think it's important to not take this opportunity to just remove myself from this. Like, this is technically our culture, and it's something we need to discuss and not duck, in my opinion. And I think kind of one of the main things, I mean, you alluded to it a lot, that I'll say is like, John Mark, you and I are men, and we have certain privileges, especially in these circles, for sure. And a common thing through these documentaries or podcasts or articles that come out about abuse in the church, like a common thing is what women have to deal with and how marginalized and hurt women are more so than anyone else in these spaces.
Yeah.
And so just, I don't know. A shout out sounds like it's too playful, but like, I just want to put that out there of like, we're talking about all this, but man, just like, we got to do better for so many reasons, but of how we care for the marginalized. And more often than not, women are the ones that are the butt of all this abuse, and it doesn't come out until it's too late in a lot of ways. And I throw the racial element in there. Black and brown women, I think, are probably even farther down the line of the ones that take the brunt of a lot of this. Yeah,
I'd love it if we could find a woman to come on and speak to this aspect of culture.
Yeah.
Because we see it. You and I, like we see you, we see what's happening. We're not the ones to speak to it necessarily. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, but I'd love it if we could address in the future. So, yeah.
All right, let's take a break. We'll come back with a little bit more.
Sounds good.
If you like what you hear on this podcast, please make sure to follow us on social media. You can follow the hashtag RaciallySpeakingPod, as well as the accounts DMFipsy and Walker.JohnMark on Instagram and Twitter for more helpful content. Now, back to the conversation. All right, John Mark, let's do one more segment here. We're still at church, listeners.
Well,
kind of.
This is more with college, right?
Yeah, college, I guess. College church?
Christian college. Christian
college, yeah. I was going to say college church isn't a thing. Yeah, John Mark, you and I have gone back and forth a little bit. Not on here, but we wanted to talk about Jemar Tisby. And first, I'll just preface this by saying he's absolutely a modern day hero of the faith. In my opinion. In my opinion, that's not even a debatable thing.
Yeah.
So we love the stuff he's putting out. He's one of my heroes. I know he's one of your heroes.
Yeah.
You just had the opportunity to meet him recently.
I did.
I'm just remembering that now. Okay.
I shook his hand. So he came to Richmond. I think it was First Baptist brought him in because they read his book together as a church. And he spoke to local pastors, clergy, and because I'm in campus ministry, I was able to sneak in there. And I sat at one table away from him. He got up, he spoke. It was very encouraging. He always points me to following Christ. He always points to following Christ. He always uses scripture. But then he also challenges us to pursue justice because it's on God's heart. And I think that's, I think that's great that he does that. So, I follow him. I look up to him. I got to shake his hand for like a second. It felt amazing. So I was happy to meet him. Yeah, man,
I'm jealous.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you got to do that. Yeah, I can't believe I forgot that happened.
Yeah.
We just started re-recording. I'm going to defer to you for a lot of this, John Mark, but we could talk about the work that Jemar Tisby's consistently doing for hours, but specifically just recently he's been, I wouldn't say in the big picture news, but in our news, and is taking some flack for a talk he gave at Grove City College I think it's Pennsylvania, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
In Pennsylvania. He was asked to come speak there in 2020.
2019.
Oh, okay. Invited in 2019, spoke in 2020, and now Grove City is essentially saying, not essentially, but literally said it was a mistake to have him come speak to their students in chapel, citing reasons like woke culture, CRT advocate,
CRT,
and so forth. So as you can imagine, we have some thoughts on this. So let's start there. That's kind of the broad summary of what has just recently happened. And he's also put some stuff out personally and personally responded to it. So John Mark, get the ball rolling here.
Yeah. Thoughts on it. So there's an article, I think, is it also on Christianity Today? Where did I get the article? But there's an article about it so people can read it themselves and hear the report and,
I got to pull
and see what happened. What I appreciated was just the chapel that he gave. So he was invited to speak at a chapel. So all the students were in attendance. And he spoke from the book of Esther about lessons that we learn that we can apply today in caring for about racial justice, right? And he highlighted some of the things that went on over the past few years. So just this moment that we're having. I like how he said it, police brutality against Black people is the tip of the spear of this civil rights movement that we're in the middle of.
Yeah.
But it's not the only thing. That's just the thing that was most pointed and most prominent in culture. So he talked about George Floyd. He talked about Ahmaud Arbery. He talked about the man who was bird watching in New York who had the police called on him. He addressed all those things, but then he also used the verse from Esther to talk about for such a time as this, where Esther's uncle Mordecai is inviting her, encouraging her to ask the queen to go before the king and stand in a place of her people and say, "Hey, you're gonna kill my people," right? And so his charge to the students and to us, anyone who listens to it, is to see how God would use us to pursue justice, right? And so he preached in the style that is more Black church than it is white college, right? But it was very much a preaching. It was very much a sermon that you could hear on a Sunday. And so I think it was appropriate for the chapel, but there is a cultural clash that happened, and those who respond to conversations about racial justice in a negative way, those who have all the pushback, those who label CRT, just like those during slavery days, label people as abolitionists negatively, those who are following that line of history, that through line in that camp came after him and really put pressure on Grove. I think the leadership of Grove put their tail between their legs and didn't stand up for making a good decision to have him. So I think that's what's happening. One of the lines that stood out to me the most in his talk was he said to these college students, he said, "The way that you respond now to this moment is the way that you would have responded to Dr. King."
Yeah, very powerful.
And then he went on to talk about to use primarily Dr. King as an illustration. And then he gets all this pushback. So it's as if they are responding just like they would have in the 60s. Just like, it's they literally are responding the way he said that what they made true his statement. I guess they're an example of the statement that he said. And the way that you are responding to this is the way you would have responded to Dr. King.
A real case in point.
Not that much has changed. Yeah. So I think his talk was great. It's 20 something minutes.
Very short.
I recommend it's online. I recommend people go listen to it.
Yeah, very short. Yeah, I think, and so to back up, just to give everyone context, Grove City College, roughly, I think it was about 3,000-ish students overall, very small. In Pennsylvania, small, Christian college. Is at a chapel service. I watched the whole talk and read this whole article. I wanted so badly for the camera to show the audience because I wanted to see demographics, but most of all, I wanted to see their reactions because at the end they clapped and you could hear some like oohs and ahs while he was preaching, but I really just wanted to see how much of a limb he was out on. Because it's just, it's on him the whole time. So I'm like, oh my gosh, what are people's reactions right now? Because I think that matters because of what's happening now with the pushback from leadership. I was like, well, were the students on board with this talk? Or were they sitting there uncomfortable? I don't know. I'm sure it was a very uncomfortable room, but
from the sound of it, the pushback came later, like a long time later from alumni and parents. not students, which is wild to think about. Like,
right. That's what I gathered.
You're a college student and your mom is complaining. Like, you're the one who's supposed to be in this institution learning, not your mom. Like, leave your mom behind. If you have a problem, bring it forward, not your mom. This is
already happening in secondary education. I didn't, it's troubling to see it trickle all the way up to the college level.
Talk about coddling our children, right? And to not be able to be adults, so.
Yeah. I highlighted a bunch that I think I highlighted, or that was from the talk that you said, but that he called out people that would have reacted the same back in the 60s. I think it's worth saying also, important context to know that this is 2020, fresh off of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery. Like, he wasn't reaching back a couple years to talk about them. Like, this has just happened, and it's fresh, and I think that adds to his. If you go back and watch his fire as he's preaching, him just being extremely animated, because he's living in what he's practicing what he's preaching. The urgency, there's an urgency of now. That's kind of been his mantra over the last few years. Is like now. There's an urgency of now, and brings in Esther of for such a time as this, the biblical story. Yeah, we can't wait. Like, maybe this is the time that you were meant to live in and speak into. And I think that just is a perfect example of why he was there doing this. Because I've got to imagine that I would assume this is true, but he probably wasn't necessarily sure of how much of what would happen, like of what support he even had. And I wanted to even shed light on that, because he's huge. He's on much bigger stages than anything we can relate to. But I am just increasingly sad, because this isn't the first time something like this has happened to him. But of just how I know how frustrating and even lonely at times it can be to do something like what he did. To experience like, this isn't just like disagreement a little bit. Like, he's experiencing complete betrayal. Like, they're calling him a mistake to have him come.
Yes.
And just doing everything they can to label him as something that he's not. And with the CRT stuff, or a progressive woke culture, essentially. And this is a Christian college, anti orthodox beliefs. And they're doing all that to appease people complaining about him talking about race too much, injustice. And it ties into stuff we've talked about here with comfortability and kind of just making things as palatable as they can for majority culture in these settings, which is literally what has perpetuated these conversations continuing to happen. Like, it's the tension is palpable in those situations, because he's literally talking about, Dr. King, and talking about these phenomenon happening, and it's happening in the room as he's speaking. And then now with the pushback, that's what he's experiencing. Like, I've seen a lot of people even use Dr. King against him, and saying, like, because of the "I have a dream" speech, like, he imagined little kids, only judging each other based on character, the content of their character. So he would not like what you're doing, like telling Jemar Tisby that, and him being like, literally, case in point.
And he can't take. I love he used that speech, and he didn't take it out of context, right? He didn't just isolate that quote. But if you look at that whole speech, you're not going to like what Dr. King has to say. Yeah. But then that's just the one speech. If you look at his whole ministry and life and the movement, you absolutely are not going to like what he has to say if you think that if you boil down his stance to that one quote. But I like what you're saying, and how, and considering the broader culture that invited him into it. I think of some other examples. Like, I'm impressed that Grove hasn't taken it down. Like, so often what happens is they get their public relations people, and they're like, all right, number one, we take the video off so that, we hide the evidence. We minimize damages, right? And I've seen that happen with Kim New-Wan at, I think it was the Sparrow Conference in like 2018. And then 2017, or maybe it was 2019. I think there was a conference where Latasha Morrison spoke, and the other speakers are still up, but her talk is not up anymore. And same thing with Propaganda, right? He had a small talk. You can't find that online. Okay. And so what happens is when we have these Black speakers come in and speak about hard truths and put a challenging way before a white audience, often the response is to, it was like, oh, we didn't like that. Let's hide it. Let's take it down. So I don't know. I'm glad that it's still available to watch, to hear. So it's still online in the archives of Grove City College chapels. So, but yeah, that's certainly something that they do, is they try to minimize. And I see a lot of that happening with Grove City. Minimize the damages after there's a significant amount of vitriolic pushback.
Right.
Yeah.
It's also worth noting, like, as I said, he's got a much bigger platform. I know has got great support and great community, but it doesn't mean that this isn't traumatic for him to go to or to go through. We can relate, you and I, on a much smaller scale, but this is just a snippet into why it is. I think a lot of people of color who speak up about this kind of stuff, there is this not defensiveness, but self-protectiveness of not exactly knowing how to do that all the time, and being I can't think of, resistant, or just not knowing who to trust. And I can imagine that Jemar Tisby right now is going through that. You know, he's going to have this experience, take this with him now for professionally, even when asked to. It'll be harder now for people to get him to speak in these kind of spaces because of this experience, I would imagine. Yeah. Because out of self-protection, he's going to associate this with, well, is this going to be another Grove City experience? And so that's why I would want, our our friends in white culture to understand this dynamic of where pain can even come from. Because I know a lot of times white people seeking these conversations want it to feel as comfortable as possible. And us just to hear each other out and to be treated as individuals and start with a blank slate, which I just want people to know that is kind of impossible because of stuff like this. Knowing the pain that we've experienced behind closed doors and publicly, but especially behind closed doors, just knowing that people would just be more aware that is a thing, and it's unreasonable to think that we're going to come to these conversations just with rose-colored glasses, believing that history is not going to continue to repeat itself. We can be hopeful, but when stuff like this keeps coming out, and these are the experiences of leaders in these conversations, what would we expect from littler people like like you and I?
So I have a question for you.
Okay.
To give some practical advice. How would you advise someone how to care for Jemar Tisby, or you and me, or any Black or brown person who cares about racial justice, speaks about it, and then receives pushback for it? So how would you advise our white friends of Black and brown people to care for their friends when they receive this type of pushback?
So this is after pushback? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think in an ideal world, somebody from Grove City would reach out, somebody with power would reach out and be an ally. And you and I have talked about what we think being an ally means. And you can have different opinions about it. But I think, to me, a non-negotiable for an ally is that you are just in lockstep with the people that you're claiming to be an ally for. It doesn't mean you agree with every single thing they say and pat them on the back and are just a yes man for them. Like, that's not, people, I think that that's what we mean sometimes, and that's not what we mean.
Right.
Like, we need to be on equal playing field, though, and have real conversations that we can have the freedom to be wrong in. And all that to say, I'm not saying Jemar Tisby is wrong at all. In this instance, I'm saying that ideally somebody in power from Grove City would say, hey, I'm sorry this is happening. We are wrong. And this is what I'm doing about it. And that can take different forms, but I think something that would, for me personally, would go a long way would be, if I was in that situation, not for this to happen to Jemar Tisby, but to know that whoever that leader is having a meeting and is at least putting his or her best foot forward, advocating for the injustice that Jemar Tisby is experiencing in this incident.
Yeah.
Calling together the board or whoever, I don't know, the president sitting down and saying like, hey, we're wrong for this. Knowing that they may get pushback and probably will, but to me, that does a couple things. That shows that they care, but it also shows that they're willing to sacrifice something, because that takes some guts to do. Yeah. They're sacrificing relationship. They might be sacrificing well-being, vocationally. And I know that can be legitimate reasons to not do something, but solidarity and allyship, to me, that's the forms it takes, because it takes risking something for something you think is right. Yeah. Because the flip side, think about Jemar Tisby. He's suffering vocationally as well, and emotionally and personally by enduring all of this. So to have someone not want to risk that for this, I won't blame them necessarily, but I won't call them an ally if you're not willing to do certain things. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I think that's well said. Yeah. Yeah. That's some good practical picture of how to respond to this. I think that's helpful.
To me, going to leadership, or especially if you're a leader, it's got to be some form of that. Like, that's where I think the action needs to take place. It can't just be a phone call from somebody that works at the university and it's just a personal one-on-one level. That would mean next to nothing for me.
Not just the one black professor.
Yeah, it shouldn't be, hey man, like that was really good. I don't agree with the pushback, and have it be that. Like that's in the grand scheme of things, nothing.
Yeah.
Especially to something like Jemar Tisby.
Yeah. I would also say, for those who want to be friends to black and brown people, for those who want to be allies, I would say, when it comes up in your circles, when there's nobody of color around you, say something, speak out, don't take our word for these things. Don't just read an article, but actually listen to Jemar Tisby's own account, listen to his chapel and see for yourself if the allegations are true. See for yourself if it's off or as I see it, it is honoring of God. He did a great job with the passage and a great encouragement to pursue justice in a Christ-like way. But yeah, honestly, like those conversations don't pop up when we're around it. Those criticizing conversations of people who are pursuing justice don't pop up when you're in a room with your white friends or when I'm in a room. And for those who love us, for those who love black and brown people, like, be the voice that shuts those conversations down or changes them and puts them in a better direction. I think that's a picture of allyship too.
I think there's, even from this article, I was just skimming it again of stuff I highlighted, but some of the paradox here is a lot of times justice seekers, when they bring up justice, they're labeled as the ones being divisive. But I think this article paints that or talks about this in a helpful way. Earlier in the article, Jemar Tisby says that organizations like Grove City are using CRT, critical race theory, as a type of a junk drawer for anything that has to do with race or justice, and just and he's shedding light on how that's just completely hypocritical and disingenuous, because literally they're labeling him as something he's not. And he goes on to say, I'm just not that. I'm not a critical race theorist. I haven't been trained. There's experts that are critical race theorists. I'm not that. We're using this as, like he says, a junk drawer to just label everything so that we can keep conversations like this from continuing. And then later he says, speaking of, who is actually being divisive, if you create an environment where people are constantly afraid for their job, and are afraid something they might say could be interpreted as CRT because everybody is interpreting CRT in very different ways, they are creating a culture where people aren't going to be able to have hard conversations, which is absolutely what's happening here at Grove City and in so many other spaces. When really we just want to, hopefully we're modeling that on here, but we want to have conversations. And we want to have conversations that seemingly we're not welcome to have in a lot of spaces like this. Yeah. We're not asked to just have listeners in an audience that say, yep, you're right about everything. Because we're not, right? Yeah. I don't think we're right about everything. Unless,
yeah, no, definitely not. Jemar? I'm sure I've said stuff wrong just in the past hour. So, right. Yeah, no, definitely not. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So those are, some of the cultural things that I think we want to be diligent to push back on in our conversations on here.
Yeah, that's well said.
You got anything else to add here?
Yeah, no, I don't. But I'm sure we will share more about Jemar Tisby as it comes. Absolutely. Because I'll point people to him. His books, The Color of Compromise, I highly recommend. How to Fight Racism is practically helpful. I just, look up his stuff and see if it benefits you. That's all I got to say.
Right. I haven't read How to Fight Racism but I do think he's put out a version that's good to help talk to your kids about racism. So I haven't read that, but Color Compromise, highly, highly recommend. It's essentially a survey of history.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes all the way up to now-ish, 2020, I guess. Right. Extremely helpful book.
Yeah, he does a good job in that book.
Yeah. All right, John Mark, we got to get out of here. Thank you for potting with me, as always. Listeners, thank you for listening. The music you're listening to was done by our good friend, Dylan Dent. Our artwork was created by the also great Ashley Bush. And we will see you guys next time.
The nightmare might scare you, no worse than reality. They hunt you by day, R.I.P. Ahmaud Arbery. Everybody got a time, but that's less than comforting. I hope I'm alive by the time they choose to comfort me. Mosquitoes in the vein, or leeches on my soul. This money on my mind is a fracture in my bones. You get crippled by continuing existence like a ghost. And they wonder why we drink, and they wonder why we smoke, and they wonder why we think that everything's a joke. I'm shocked that we can sleep, must be the thought of letting go. Now I lay me down to sleep, I'm better with the valley. Now I lay me down to sleep, I'm better with the valley. Now I lay me down to sleep, I'm better with the valley.